Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Menachot daf Sadi Aleph. We are going to begin on Sadi Aleph Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top. Omer Mar, Taida Menayin. So our Mishnah in yesterday's daf talked about that when it comes to karbanos, which are nidava, we have to accompany that with nesachim. Generally speaking, when it comes to Nische Chayva, when it comes to rather karbanos, which are an obligation, so then we do not require it. So we also said it depends, like for example, Olas Re'iyah does require the Olas Ha'of when it comes to the bird for two different reasons. It does not require Nesachim. And then we discussed the Siri Chatas of Musaf, which is not required Nesachim. Okay, so how about when it comes to a Toda? Menayin Talmud number O Zavach. The fact that it says O is a reboy to include that whenever you bring a Toda, you also need to bring the Sachim. So Atu what? Toda Lav Zavachu? Understand. What do you mean? It says O Zavach. So to include it. Zavach is a carbon. So a Toda is a carbon. So why do you need it? We still need O anyway. Maybe since we already know that a Toda has breads, right? So maybe lo tiboy nesachim. Maybe you don't need to have the nesachim because it replaces the obligation of having the nesachim. So Maishna Ma'ayil Nazir, Di'ika Bahadei Lechem Uboy Nesachim. Now we know that in addition to Toda, which requires 40 breads, so the Ayil Nazir, which is also proportioned with 10 and 10, we also require bread, but we already know you need Nesachim. So the fact that you have bread shouldn't be a reason to exclude Nesachim by Toda either. Hasam Shnei Minim, Hacha or Bas Minim, Kamashmon. Toda is 4, right? 4 times 4. 4 times 10 is 40. So even though it's true there are breads, there's only 20. So okay, fine, still have to bring the Sachim. However, when it comes to the Toda, which is 40 breads, so maybe you don't need a Sachim. Okay, so that's the logic. So let it just say that. And we wouldn't need when it comes to an Ola. So so why does it mention an oil also needs the Sachim? Because otherwise, Havamina v'yasisa mishal Hashem klal. You would say that this is inclusive. Well, following that, on the davas prat is exclusive. Well, harech nechoyach because of a call. Klal prat klal yitadanu kena prat. Mapra maforish. Just like when it comes to a prat, davar she'enu ba al hachet, it's something in which does not come with a sin, because it's the neder and the dava. It's like it's a free will offering. It's not like a chov. So I've called she'in ba al chet. So oitzi chatas asham she'in boyin al chet. The reason why you bring a chatas and asham is not a nedava. So therefore they do not require nesachim, as we saw in yesterday's Mishnah. However, Avia will include b'chor meiser upesach she'in boyin al chet. Maybe these things do require Talmud Loimer oil. So as we saw in the Mishnah, that when it comes to everything requires nesachim chutz min b'chor v'maisim pesach. So because those are also chovos. So Talmud Loimer oil. So hashda dechsiv oila klal prat marbisleis. What is it coming to teach us? So ma'pra mafor shenu mechuyev. It's something in which is not a previous obligation, but oimid. I've called shenu mechuyev oimid. Well, havi vladais kadashim, which comes to include vladais of kadshim, v'tumur sehen, and the tumur of it, v'oila haba min osiris, and the oil which is brought from the extra, v'asham shenitek ru'iyah, or an asham that's grazing. V'chol zvachim shenizbachu shlol shman, any carbon that is brought shlol shman. So these are all karbanos that were enu mechuyev oimed. V'hash the diamid. Oh, so that's what that's coming to tell you. So this should answer our question by Tamura. Tamuras oila, right? So Tamuras oila, it says over here tu'un nesachim. So that is 11D. Okay, so we see clearly that Tumura does require. Okay. So v'hashta the armit o l'drasha l'fali nedel o l'nedava l'amali l'chalka, to tell you that you're chayiv on bringing a separate nesachim for each one. What's the chiddush? It's rachsach damina ademesi nedem nedava l'boy nesachim kamashmo. The ac nedel chudei l'boy nesachim v'yes nedava chudei leis nesachim. So you would maybe have a havimina to think that's only if you bring a neder and a nedava both, then the nesachim are brought. If you only brought one, a neder or a nedava, you wouldn't kamashmo either one. So hanichel Rabbi Yeshaya el Rabbi Yonasan Ma'ilim. So Lamali, as we already said in yesterday's daf in this Rashi, that whenever it says Yachdav, so then it's including, you need both. For example, Shatniz is Beged, which has Semer Upishtin Yachdav. So then you're not chayiv if you only wear linen or wool, but if you wear them together. So, but it doesn't say Yachdav, then each one is a separate chiyuv. So that's how Rabbi Yonasan learns it, and he says, and this is actually learned out by cursing your parents. It says Mekal Obe v'Imoy. So you're chayiv even by cursing one of them, because otherwise it doesn't say Yachdav. So the question is, why would you think that you need to do both? Right? It doesn't say Yachdav there. So Sagadanamina, Aisin Nedel Chudei Leboy Nesachim. If you bring a neder, you need Nesachim. Aisin the double Chudei, if you bring the double by itself, Leboy Nesachim. Aisin Neder B'Nedava to Sagim Nesachim Dechad Kamashmuan. It's not that it's telling you would think that you need to bring both because it doesn't say Yachdav. Of course, if you bring a neder, a carbon for a neder, you bring the sachim. If you bring a carbon for a nedava, you bring the sachim. But what happens if you bring one for a neder and nedava? So in that situation, the chiddush is that you can't just bring one set of nesachim for both. They have to be separate. 2 nesachim are required. Then the pasuk says, "Oba muadechem lo." You would think, maybe the only time you have to bring separate is if the ola was for a neder and the shlomim for a nedava. 2 totally separate korbanos, and one was a neder, one was a nedava. So maybe only there. The other way around. Even though they're different types of karbanos, but they're both, you're bringing 2 karbanos as a neder, 2 karbanos as a nedava, so then you would think shem neder echad or shem nedava achasi to sagulim and asachim dechad kamashmon o bomuadechem. So I'm to tell you no, that you have to bring a separate nesachim for each one, even though an oila was a neder and a shlom was a neder. They're both nedarim. Still, you have to bring separate nesachim. And then the pasuk says, "V'chi sase ben bakar oilo zavach." So Lamali, why does it say "oh" there? So that's because you brought an oil and a shlomim. They're 2 separate karbanos. Inami oil shlom and nedava. V'hecha dekamaisi shtei oilos chada ben neder v'chada ben nedava. Inami shnei shlomim. Echam neder echam nedava. Ema shem shlomim achasi. Shem oil achasi. Maybe you only need 1 nesachim here because even though it's a neder and a nedava, they're 2 separate things, but they're both olos or they're both shlomim. Kamashmon will find neder o shlomim to tell you kamashmon. So it's coming to tell you the chiddush in this pasuk is telling you that no, even though it's the same, they're 2 of the same karbanos, they're both olos, but because one's a neder, one's a nedava, so you need separate nesachim. We'll find it in Shlomo Lamu. Sachne Ramina, Hanimil Hechad Maisi Shtei Oilos, Chadam and Evachad Ben Nadava. Mina Mishnei Shlomim, Chadam and Evachad Ben Nadava. Well, Hechad the Kamaisi Shtei Olos, Ben Neder. You brought 2 olos, and they're the same carbon, they're both olos, and it's both a neder. Or Vishtei Olos Ben Nadava. Ina Mishnei Shlomim Neder, Vishtei Shlomim Ben Nadava. Shem Oila Achasu, Shem Neder Achasu. So not only is it the same carbon, the 2 carbonos are both an ola, both of them are a neder, for example. So there, where everything is identical, then for sure you would think for the sagum nasachim dechad. Just do 1, kamash 1. The chiddush is it doesn't make a difference. One's buzz zevelim and al zeh. We need all of these. You can't just jump to this one. So each drush is building onto the next. And in all these cases, you always need a separate set of nesachim. Rabbi Yeshaya, Hayim Bakar Min Atzayin Lomali. What does he do in this pasuk? Again, according to Rabbi Yeshaya, based on the machlokis of Yachtov. So Salvad al Hamina Hanimili betray Mini. Maybe it's only in the case where it's a bakar and son, where they're two totally separate animals. Abachad Mina, but let's say they're both cattle, right, or both sheep. Just Sagum Nesachim Dechad Kamash one. Kacha Ta'asul Echad Lamali. So when did that pasuk? Saknamina Hanimili Bezar Chazet. Maybe the only time you have to bring two separate nesachim is because you're bringing them at different times. But let's say you make a neder nadav, you bring the whole thing at the same shot. So basically, what this is telling you is you always have to bring a separate nesachim, no matter what. And the fact that you bring two korbanos, that doesn't mean, you're just bringing two, so it's at the same time. It's just, they're both olos, they're both nedarim. Doesn't make any difference. You always have to bring your own nesachim. That's basically what this whole Amid was saying. Okay, and then the Mishnah said, so our Mishnah said the general rule that if you have a carbon yachid or a tzibor, you always require nesachim. That's usually by the neder and the dava. It's free will, as opposed to something which is a chayiv, such as bechor, meiser, pesach, chatas, and asham. However, when it comes to a chatas, even though a chatas normally does not require nesachim, the chatas of Mitzayra and its asham require nesachim. So there's an exception by the Mitzayra. So how do we know to make this exception? The Tanabanim. The pasuk says v'shloish esroinim, 3 esroinim of soilus mincha is the mincha. But mincha haba ima zevach madam. This is referring to the mincha that is brought together with a carbon. So ato aimer b'mincha haba ima zevach lo eno ela mincha haba b'chniatzma. Maybe it's a mincha that's just being brought by itself, not with a carbon. Kashu aimer ve'el hakayin es oila, that he brings it up. Ves hamincha. So have aimer b'mincha haba ima zevach chas madam. The pasuk is clearly talking about the mincha with a carbon. So any day I still don't know im tu nesachim v'im lav. So does this require nesachim? So b'loimer v'yayin l'nesach or v'yisahin tiasel oila o l'zevach l'keres ho'echad oila zu oilas mitzayra. So this is referring to those mitzayra that requires nesachim. Zevach zu chatas mitzayra. So therefore, it's coming to tell you that the mitzayra has to bring the sachim. Ola zevach zu asham mitzayra. So, but typically, Tervayu, why don't we learn out both of them? Zevach. Why don't we learn out from Zevach? Says Rashi. Typically, Tervayu chatas asham. Learn out chatas and asham from Zevach. V'oli boy kral l'chol chad v'chad. Why do you need separate psukim over here? Typically, Tervayu mizevach. As we continue to Tzadi Aleph Amud Beis. The Omer Mar, because after all, chatas v'asham anayin. How do we know? Says Rashi. Gabi Nazir. When it comes to a Nazir, the lokach as ser rosh nizro. They take the hair and they put underneath the carbon under the fire. So Talmud Leimer zevach, and over there it's talking about both. So hanimil heichad ravayu ki hadandinhu. That's only where they're the same. Says Rashi, the nafki tervayu chatas asham shel Nazir. The chi hadandinhu are the same. The tervayu lachshir b'yayin. They both serve the same purpose when it comes to a nazir, to allow him to start drinking wine and also to start becoming tamei lameis. That's the purpose of both of them. They both have the same utility, if you will. When it comes to the mitzayra, the purpose of the asham is lahachshir. Lahachshir what? So allow him to go back into the machane, and the chatas is lachaper. Because saras comes as a punishment, so that is the purpose of the chatas. So the asham is a machshir to go back in, and the chatas, right, they accomplish different things. That's why you need 2 psukim. Zevach zu chatas amatzayra. So that's what we said. That the word zevach is referring to the chatas mitzvah requires nesachim. The aim is zu chatas v'asham the nazir. How do we know it's talking about a mitzvah? It's talking about a nazir. The sanya uminchasam and iskehem the mincha and its libations ba'olaso uv'shlama v'kasam adaber. We're talking about an oil and a shlom. So maybe the chatas of a nazir also. So ayil is b'chlal hoyu. It's in the general category of all karbanos. So v'lo miyatza. So why do we single out ayil? Hakishlo. Ma ayil miyuchid ba b'nedem v'nedava. Avkol b'nedem v'nedava. It's only something which comes as a free will offering. Oilas zu oilas matzara. So we say that's referring to the oilas matzara that requires nesachim. The ema zu oilas yoledes. Maybe it's referring to the oila of a woman who gives birth, requires nesachim. So I'm Rabbi oilas yoledes mesever kra nafka. We're doing it up from the end of the pasuk. The sign here, Rebbe Nasan Aimer lekeves zu oilas yoledes. Ha'achas ze echad aser shel meiser. This is referring to the 11th animal of Meiser Behema, Shekar of Shlomov, it can be makar as Shlomim. Shlomit Sino of Cholotayra Shehe Tafel Chomer Min Iker. We never find that the Tafel should be more Chomer than the Iker. What does that mean? So Rashi points out that when it comes to Meiser Sheni, it works betois, in a mistake. That if a person requires, even by the 11th one, the Sachim, because if a person would, when the animals are coming out, and the 10th one is Ma'aseh Behema, if he accidentally calls number 9, 10, and number 10, 11, 11, 10, right, they're all kadosh, and the 9th one you eat b'mumay, when it develops in mum, the 11th one you bring as a shlomim, and it requires the sachim, right? So number 11 actually does require that, but we say the tafel should not become an ikr. Ela zeh hamais zeh de meiser gufe luboy nesachim. Though this one doesn't need to say this one doesn't need nesachim. Vayni asi mekaychay tay nesachim. It would be kind of hard to understand that number 10 doesn't require nesachim, which is what our Mishnah said, right? Our Mishnah said that when it comes to bechor meiser, so meiser behema, number 10 does not need nesachim, but then we're going to say number 11 requires nesachim. That's illogical, right? We wouldn't say such a thing. Okay. Because we wouldn't say that the tafel is chamer min ikr to require nesachim, right? We're not going to say that. Because our Mishnah, right? Because our Mishnah excludes meiser, which is the 10th animal, from the sachim. Okay. All right, let's keep on moving. So it can't be referring to yoledes. So it's talking instead, as we said, it's referring to an oilus matzayra. Okay, not an oilus yoledes, oilus matzayra. That requires nesachim. Fine. So Rabbi Omer Ezu Davar Shesarach Shloisha Ribuyin. What requires 3 additions? Haviyar Mizu Matzayra. That's what it's referring to. Okay. Why is that? It says Rashi Isli Shloisha Karbanos. Because Matzayra has 3 karbanos: a chatas, an oila, and an asham. It can't be a nazir because a nazir has 4 requirements: chatas, oila, asham, shlomim. Right? So therefore, if it's talking about 3, it can't be talking about a nazir, it's going to be talking about a mitzvah. Okay. Fine. So Aimer Zumatzera L'ayil Lamali. So Amar Rav Sheshes Rabos Elu Shel Aharon. On Yom Kippur, the aisle in which Aharon, the Kohen Gadol, would bring, also required nesachim. Elu Shel Aharon min Moadechem Nafka. We already learned yesterday's daf that Moadechem, even if it's a chayiv but it's holiday related, requires nesachim. So it's not going to be a hanimeli the tzibur of the yachid loy. Maybe there's the distinction. Maybe we think the only time you would need to bring the sachim is if it's tzibur carbon. But when it comes to Aaron, who is a yachid, obviously, so maybe he wouldn't require the sachim. Umashna oilos yoledes. So why would it be any different than oilos yoledes? The ayil she'aron. So the ayil she'aron is a yachid, right? So we also said, we at least thought the same thing when it came to a yoledes. So that's a yachid. So maybe it's only something that is not time related, like the yoledes and give birth anytime. Which is on Yom Kippur, the Al Yom Kippurim, maybe you don't need nesachim kamash malon. So you can make a distinction between zman related or not time related. And then the pasuk says ol ayil blumuli. So Rabbis is a palgus. So if you bring a palgus, you also have to bring the sachim. Says Rashi, a palgus is she'aver shenasai v'lo bo b'chal shnayim. It's past the year mark, but it hasn't reached year 2, which basically means a palgus is this quasi in-between type of an animal. It's a sheep in its 13th month. An ayil is more than 13 months. A keves is less than 12 months. So this palgus between 12 and 13 months, the question is, if you bring that, will you require nesachim? And the chiddush is yes. So anicho Rabbi Yonasan Diyamer Beriahu, one who says it's his own species. Okay, I understand. It requires nesachim. Did not hikrivu maybe love nischi ayil. So you should bring the nesachim for an ayil. Again, an ayil is more than 13 months. Ve'enu oyel lil mizbachai. Rabbi Yochanan ol ayil Rabbis is a palgus. So that makes sense. He includes a palgus that you have to bring the sachim. El labar padad yomrim aisi that you do bring it umasni, but you should make a condition to sveikahu, because we're not sure what type of an animal this is. Does it have the status of an ayil? Does it have the status of a keves? Itzrach kro l'revi sveika. So understand, why would the pasuk need to tell me that, in the case of a suffix, you have to bring the sachim? Hashem knows whether this animal halachically is an ayil or a keves. We just don't know. We don't know. But there's no sveikas klapi shemaya. Hashem knows. So, how do we understand this? So, vadai lo bar pada kasha. According to Bar Pada, who says that a palgus, your maisi umasni, so then why would you even need a pasuk for that? It's obvious. There's no suffix, right? So if you hold a beri b'fnei atzma, you need another pasuk. But if it's a suffix, it's either this or this, so it's either one or the other. Okay. All right. So that'll be a kasha. Let's stop for 1 second. It's basically the same question for all of them. 12. Hamevi palgus shuhu eat ben keves l'ayil l'karbano elu nesachim maybe imoi. These are the nesachim that are brought with it. Okay. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's a bir b'fnei atzmo. The Torah includes it that he needs to bring the same nesachim as like an ayil. According to Bar Pada, it's a suffix keves, it's a suffix ayil, and therefore he has to bring the nichsi ayil and make a condition that if it's a keves, hu hashar nedava, right? So basically, if it's an ayil requires more nesachim than a keves. So therefore, he makes this condition, and if taka it's an ayil, so then he's fine. If not, then he's just going to say the rest is nedava. That's what it says over here. Im kevesu yakdeshu nesachim. If it's a keves, he's sanctified. Haruin lo. V'hamoisir nedava. Right, and the left is a nedava. Right, so that's the basic idea of that. Okay, that's question 13. That's going to be the only question. That was question 12. TA 10. Ketzan Mavin Nesachim Lapalgus. So same idea. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you bring the Nichse Ayil. That's what he says. Maybe you'll have Nichse Ayil. Okay. You have to bring the Nesachim of that of an Ayil. However, according to Bar Pada, the whole thing's a suffix. You bring Nixi ayil, but you make a condition that if it's an ayil, good. If it's a keves, then the leftover will be in the nedava. That was TA 10. TB 13. It's exact same question. ask the same question sometimes. So let's see. Okay. Ze beri bifni atzmo. It's beri bifni atzmo. V'yesh safik ma hadin v'hevi shel ayil. Al tenai. Im zedin ka'ayil hari shnei asronim v'im lav hamoiser hu nedava. It's not totally wrong. If it's a beri bifni atzmo, then you bring the nichse ayil. So either you bring the nichse ayil if it's a ber bifnei atzmo. If it's a suffix, you still bring nichse ayil, but then you make a condition that if it's really a keves, then the leftovers are when the double. Okay, let's finish this daf. Fine. So it should be done with a shor, or ayil echad, or l'seh, b'kvasim, or b'izim. L'shor ha'echad, matam l'amr. What does that mean? Lafi shematzinu shechalik kasuv bein nichse ayil and nichse keves. We know that there's a difference in how much nesachim between an ayil. There's more than the nesachim that's brought for a keves, which we just said. So yachol, you would think nechalik bein nichse par and nichse egel. You would think also we make a difference between a par and an egel. Talmud shor echad. When it comes to a shor, which could be under the category of a par or an egel, depending on the age, we say that the nesachim are the same. So there's no difference between a par and an egel. The nesachim are the same. But the difference between an ayil and a keves, which is it's the same animal, it's just older, right? There we do make a distinction. So an egel to a par, which is the same animal but different in age, so we give the same nesachim. However, from a keves to an ayil, we do, as we said, differently. So, and then it says, "Ol ayil." Ben shano and nichse ben shtayim. We see there's a distinction between 1 and 2 years old. Maybe between 2 and 3, there should also be a difference. In other words, so we know there's a difference between the sachim between a keves and an ayil. An ayil is already in its 2nd year, so what if maybe it's in its 3rd year? Talmud loimer ol ayil ha'echad. When it comes to an ayil, that's it. We don't view an ayil as after 13 months or after 2.5 years any difference with regard to the sachim. As we said, there is a difference between less than a year old and more than 13 months. So So just as we make a distinction between a male sheep and a male ram, so based on age, that we bring more nesachim for an ayil than for a keves. So maybe it's the same thing when it comes to a kisva and rachela, right, which is a female. It's dafka when it comes to a male, the keves to an ayil, but not a female sheep. So we do see a difference in the sachim there. So the difference between a kid goat and a he goat. Talmud loimer o be'izim. So basically, when it comes to the sachim, there's no difference, right, between a par, right, by the sachim. There's no difference in amount based on age for a par to an egel, as well as to a par to an egel, a gedi to a sa'ir, and a kivsa to rachela. So the only difference is between a keves, at least up until now, and an ayil. Okay. That's the only difference. Okay. Okay. So let's keep on moving. So Yochel Chalik Ben Nixi Gedil Nixi Seir Talmud Leimer O Beizim. Last line. Omer Papa. Badik one Rava. So Rava was examining, looking into it as we continue to Sadi Beis Amud Aleph. Nixi Rachela Bekalma. When we talk about a female sheep, or EWE, how much is brought? Upashtina le'memastisin. Gedi mishamish nixi tzayin shel gedolim b'shel katanim. When it comes to gedi, it's mishamish in the sachim of that of a tzayin shel gedolim b'shel katanim. Shel zacharim b'shel nekevus. Chutz b'shel elim. Okay, let's look in Rashi. Nixi rachelo b'kami yayin hitzricha. How much wine for the nesachim needs to be brought over there? So that's the question. He says, "Chutz mishel elim shlo haya noitel mishel motzarch nichse elim lefi shein nesachim shavan nesachin." Okay, fine. The hachi hakeves haya toin revias ahin ali isaron. When it comes to a keves, it requires a quarter of a hin to each isaron. Misha haya mavakesh nesachim halach etzel Yochanan hamamuuna. You go to him, and he knows all these dinim. Fine. Okay. All right. So we see a female. When it comes to a female animal, there's no difference in its years. So we're gonna again echo that a little bit more tomorrow, I believe. Okay. Let's possibly see another question. First of all, question 13. They'll come to Sibur Yishmahem Smicha. No, we're not going to do that. Smicha, of course, is only for a carbon yachid usually, but we'll see a couple exceptions for that. There's 2 karbanos sibor only that we had earlier in this Masechta. TA 11 Mahadin Sirius Sirabadazil in Smicha, no, and Mahadin Sirius Abadazil in Smicha. So we're going to learn about Smicha tomorrow's daf. Adkan.